Some recent statements by NATO express a serious concern about whether or not the United States is going to remain in Afghanistan. As you recall, Trump has used a lot of fluffy rhetoric about pulling out of the country, bringing the troops home, etc. Of course, nothing of any substance has been manifested, but it is something that is of concern to NATO because they have made a recent statement about it. Now, a senior U.S. defense official cited by Reuters on Monday claimed that Donald Trump's desire to get the troops home for Christmas, he had caused a flurry of calls among NATO allies. So he's essentially saying, in less than 2 months he will pull troops home from Afghanistan. So obviously this has alarmed a lot of NATO allies because Trump does act in a very rash way without really thinking things through first. So not that it's not good that he would do that, but NATO believes that he really will. Now, from Brussels, the NATO spokeswoman Anna Lunska said that the alliance's stance on the conflict-ravaged Afghanistan hasn't changed. So despite anything Trump says, NATO has not changed their stance or altered their tactics or anything like that. She specifically said this: "No NATO ally wants to stay any longer than necessary. At the same time, we want to preserve the gains made with such sacrifice." Stoltenberg had just held talks with Chris Miller, whom Trump appointed last week as acting U.S. Defense Secretary after sacking Mark Esper. The latter had, according to the Associated Press, sought to talk Trump out of a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan and Syria. So it should be noted that the designated U.S. Defense Secretary Chris Miller last weekend said it was time to bring troops home from overseas. However, he did not actually give a timetable for when that might happen. And that's part of the very poor communication that we've come to know from the Trump White House. One person says one thing, one person says another, and never in between shall meet kind of thing. Now, this comes as essentially the NATO war effort in Afghanistan has been collapsing. There was supposedly peace talks that were going on that were going positively, and all of a sudden it's just completely degraded into violence. The Taliban was talking in Qatar with the U.S., and this was something Trump was very happy about. He was like, "Oh, I'm making the peace. I'm going to end the war, whatnot." Well, apparently it's been all for naught, even if we were to believe what he was saying. And this is very concerning for NATO because U.S. logistics are pretty much the logistics of the whole of the war effort. Basically, of all the countries that are involved, all the countries that have troops there, the U.S. supply chain is what's being used, and its planes, its boats, its logistics personnel are what are getting supplies around. The U.S. is carrying more than its burden on this one, and it should be noted that the U.S. doesn't even make up half of the force that's occupying Afghanistan right now. So if they were to pull out, there would still be a sizable force left. It would be cut in almost half, but the supply chain would theoretically be gone, although some have said that the U.S. would remain as a logistics supplier inside the country, which wouldn't actually be pulling out considering that you're still there perpetuating the war effort. But what's important here is that NATO itself is actually worried that Trump might actually pull out. And there could be a significant reduction in the forces used to suppress the Taliban and continue the imperialist occupation of Afghanistan. If they did pull out and NATO forces were cut by half, this would certainly embolden the Taliban to attack harder, now that they have half as much enemy in order to deal with. So this is a political nightmare for NATO to deal with, considering that the entire war against the country had nothing to do with freedom, had nothing to do with it capturing Osama bin Laden, because if so, why didn't it end when Osama bin Laden was assassinated? Because this has been about getting the rare earth minerals inside the country. I mean, the mountains in Afghanistan hold tons and tons of, all kinds of minerals that are worth about an estimated $3 trillion. Although, ironically, about $6 trillion have been spent on the war on terrorism thus far. And when you spend it twice, when your return on your investment is half of what you spent on it, that's not a very good investment. But suffice to say, in the end, they are genuinely worried that Trump will pull out. But in my personal opinion, I don't think he will. Even if he did pull the troops out, Biden's just going to put them back in on January 20th anyway. So I don't think NATO really has that much to worry about.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.